Steve Moore, alcoholic. Good to be here. Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate that introduction. Welcome. I was trying to figure out how I was going to remember those two guys' names, and I thought it's Michael and Jordan. I mean, that should be pretty simple. Welcome, guys. Glad you're here, and I know there might be some other new folks here. We're glad you're here. You know, when Lynn brought up about having a home group member speak, I did think that was a good idea, but I didn't know that, I didn't really want that to be part of that idea, but it's all good. And I do appreciate this home group and appreciate the folks that serve this group. It's kind of funny. Lynn's talking about what a committed home group member I am. And tonight, you know, Plummer and I are chairing for the next 2 weeks, and tonight I was supposed to be here at 5:30 to help set up, and I ditched her because I had more important things to do. But luckily, Jeanette and Christy, and I think Chris and some others showed up and helped her, and I appreciate that. I have been a member of this home group since it started, and I'll always be grateful for Tom Ivester and his vision and some others. I mean, it was a collective group, but it was him kind of driving that ship, and I just appreciate his vision and his inclusion to think about starting a home group. It's hard, and we've had our growing pains, but I'm glad we just last month celebrated 27 years, and I appreciate that. I would like to congratulate, so Daniel today is celebrating 27 years of sobriety. So he was our first victim, and he messed around and took the steps and been sober ever since. It's crazy how that works. So I'd like to congratulate him. I think he's a little under the weather tonight, but he assured me this morning when I talked to him that he was still sober. So we'll see. We'll check in on him a little later just to make sure. And Tim, congratulations to you on 7 years. I think it's 7 years, right? Of sobriety. Today is the day, and so I just think that's kind of cool and certainly worth mentioning. And talked to Tim this morning. I said, "Do you remember what you were doing 7 years ago?" And Tim started explaining everything, and I'm like, "Dude, you were in a blackout. You don't have a clue what you were doing 7 years ago." But I say that in jest. But I know Tim showed up, and through some good guidance of his nephew Brian, he's the guy that's taken the steps and been sober ever since. And which kind of leads into my sobriety date, I guess. My sobriety date is March 24th, 1984. And I'm a guy, and I don't say this to be braggadocious. I know it's not everybody's experience. It's a lot of people's experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I'll just speak from my own experience. I showed up here, I guess I was desperate. I was willing. At some level, I got some semblance of trying to be surrendered, and I took those steps that the people said that they took, and they've been sober like a long time. A couple of them, 1 or 2 years. One of them was an old timer. He'd been sober about 3 years. Old Harold in Rockingham, and but those guys told me, here's what they did. They took some steps, and some power showed up in their life, and they've been sober ever since for, like I said, 1 to 3 years. And that got my attention. And so that's what I did. When they showed me what they did, I did it to the best of my ability. And I'm a guy that's been sober ever since. And if there's a message in that, it's a couple of things. The power that we find in Alcoholics Anonymous, collectively in the fellowship and the program, which is laid out in our book, and taking these steps and trying to live by some traditions, the power we find in Alcoholics Anonymous is more powerful than the illness of alcoholism. And that's just been my experience. I know I had 2 things. I don't remember what the other one was. That's one of the problems with being sober a long time. You forget stuff like really quick. But there is a power that we have here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and what I think what made me a believer early on is I saw other people be sober, whether it's 7 years, God forbid, 27 years. That spoke to me. It let me know that there is something here that can arrest alcoholism. And I was a guy, when I first got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, wasn't even sure I was an alcoholic because I was kind of young, 20 years old. Now, I had known some old goats from Carthage, where I was born and raised, that had gone to treatment and joined Alcoholics Anonymous, but those guys were like in their early to mid-30s. Like, they needed to get sober. But I was a young guy, 20 years old. Like, Alcoholics Anonymous and me being an alcoholic was a bit of a stretch for me to wrap my mind around. But when I read the book and heard people's stories and I heard something the other day called critical thinking. And I had to Google it because I really try not to get too critical with thinking. And it basically said I need to analyze a situation, and it's good to ask for guidance and help, but I need to look at a situation and make my own decision. And I guess that's what I did. I looked at my life. I looked at these members of Alcoholics Anonymous that were trying to give me a solution. And I had to make a decision that I think I was alcoholic. And a blind person could see I was an alcoholic, but the real decision was I had to make a decision, did I want to get well or not? Was I willing to take some simple steps? And that's kind of how I ended up from that hopeless, degenerate of a person, really broken in every way, to hopefully a good member of society, a good citizen in the community, hopefully a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so anyway, I'll get to how all that happened. I did borrow Jeanette's watch. Last time I did that, it ended up at the pawn shop, so I'll try to get this one returned. Let me take a drink first. It's always a good idea. Don't worry, you can't smell it. I was a guy born and raised here in Moore County over in Carthage. Youngest of 6 kids. I don't know if that really means anything other than I was used to getting my way, and if things didn't go my way, I would usually pitch a fit, but I try not to do it around my parents because they didn't tolerate much of that. I mean, my dad would whip me if I needed it, and possibly whip me if I didn't need it. At least I never thought I needed it, but he always thought I needed it, and so he wasn't scared to do that. But it was a good home to grow up in, and my parents were loving parents, good parents. I guess you would call us a middle-class family, whatever that looks like. I ain't sure what that looked like in 1963. I always kind of felt a little less than. I don't know why. My parents or brothers and sisters never instilled any of that stuff in me. My dad was an encourager and all that stuff, but I just always felt a little less than for whatever reason. I always compared our family, myself, to other families that would have more, and then of course I'd compare, if I wanted to feel good about myself, I'd compare us to people that didn't have as much. And but that never really was my focus. My focus was always, why can't I have this or that, and I think I was fortunate growing up. My dad, I played Little League baseball. I was a Boy Scout. I was a pretty good ball player, I think. I was not a very good Boy Scout. I learned to lie and cheat and steal at an early age. Like, we go to Boy Scouts meetings. I don't know if this has anything to do with alcoholism or not. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But it may. But go to those Boy Scout meetings, and I found out where they kept the merit badges in the cabinet. And so I would steal merit badges to progress up the ladder of whatever it is Boy Scouts, do. And to, I guess the ultimate is Eagle Scout. I never could steal enough stuff to get the Eagle Scout, which is probably good, because it'd kind of suck having to make amends for stealing and lying and cheating your way to be an Eagle Scout. But my dad was, but he was good. He was good to us. He was good to me. He'd take us fishing. never was much of a hunter, but he'd take us target practice, and I was always, fascinated with firearms, and he had a handful of guns that were a lot of fun to shoot, and that's just, kind of what we did, and they owned a Western Auto store in Carthage, and back in the day, that was like a mini Walmart, and so we had toys, appliances, we had like everything. So Christmas time, I always felt like I didn't get enough, but my God, I probably got no telling how much more than other kids in the community, because when your parents kind of owned the candy store, you got all the candy you want, really. And that was just a good experience growing up, and it was just a good environment growing up in. I will tell you something that happened, and I don't know, this might tie into alcoholism too, but I was in the 4th grade, and my brother had a knife. Now, we weren't a violent family. We'd fuss and fight like cats and dogs, but nobody is cutting or stabbing or shooting each other, well, until this particular time. But my brother had a knife, and I wanted it. And I'm telling you, if y'all don't, in case you don't know, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. After I tell you this story, you'll understand that I am not. But I grabbed the knife. And, when you grab the blade of a knife, the person holding it is supposed to let go. That was the plan. That ain't what happened. He pulled the knife back. And I still got the scar, if you don't believe me. And it cut a big gash in my hand, and I don't think I went and got stitches. I probably should have. But the point of that is, I have not grabbed a knife since then. That's just that part of my brain works. If you can pull out a knife right now, unless you try to cut me, I still ain't gonna grab the knife. I'm just gonna let you cut me. But that part of my brain works. I learned that lesson one time. If it's going to cut me, I don't grab it again. But when it comes to alcoholism, time and time again, I would drink, I would do stuff, I would do some crazy stuff, and thinking it's going to be different, and it never was different. The part of my brain that says drinking's a bad idea just doesn't work. The part of my brain that says grabbing a knife's a bad idea, I'm glad that part works. And so anyway, growing up in that house, I always was kind of full of fear and anxious, I guess you might say. And what happened, I jump into, getting drunk pretty quick. I'm around 11 years old, and I'm camping out with some buddies of mine. It wasn't an official Boy Scout camping trip, but later on that didn't matter either. But we got a hold of some Mad Dog 2020, and I don't recommend that. I'd like for it to have been something a little more prestigious, my first drunk, but that's what we had. And I guess that was easiest to steal from the convenience store, but I drank enough of that wine to change the way I felt, and it made that fear go away, and it just, it made me as good as those other guys, and then at some point I drink enough of it, it'd make me a little superior than those other guys, and that never paid off very well when I started being a big shot, or trying to act like a big shot. But what registered in my brain that particular night was that there's nothing wrong with drinking, that all I saw it was as a solution to whatever's going on in my life. Now, my parents didn't drink. Now, my older brothers and sisters said Dad had a problem when he was, early on drinking, but he'd quit in the early 70s. So I really never knew him drinking. Mom, she quit as well. I do remember Dad would fall asleep, and I didn't really associate, I don't guess, drinking with this, but we were talking about that the other night, so some of us were, that Dad would fall asleep. He used to smoke those Lucky Strikes, and he'd fall asleep with a cigarette in his hand. And next morning we wake up and there'd be a big old hole burnt in his recliner. And I'm guessing, probably that came from drinking. But that was not something that was really ever discussed. And but he quit early on, and they didn't really condone drinking, but it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, I was just a kid. Once I found out what it would do, I was off and running. And what happened, camping out mostly, we could get something to drink. About the same time, my older brother, the one that cut me, I'm still a little mad about him cutting me now that I think about it. But went off with my brother and one of his friends. They introduced me to smoking weed. And again, I'm like 11, 12 years old. And, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around because I've got nephews and nieces that are like in that age range or have been. And I'm just thinking somebody doing that to them, I would want to kill them, really. Probably shouldn't say that from the podium, but anyway, I would. Because it's pretty serious. But I didn't think anything of it. And that became a regular occurrence. And I was a guy that always flew below the radar. Because I didn't want to get caught. I wasn't a young kid that just spun out of control. What I wanted to do was lay low, be cool, do what I wanted to do, and not get caught. And I was fairly, I guess, successful at that, for the most part. And so that's just kind of through my, I guess, junior high years and 12, 13, 14 years old. That's, drinking every chance I got. Smoking a lot of weed, was able to get away with that a fair amount. And I was a guy that, I'm not going to do any drugs because drugs are bad for you and, it's a bad idea. And I didn't consider drinking or smoking weed a big deal. And really never got in trouble with that. But by the time I got to high school, we were smoking weed every day. Drinking heavily on the weekends, but sometimes we would drink during the week if there was a basketball game and, we could get out of the house. My next older brother had his driver's license. He would have been 16. I was probably 14. And on basketball game nights, we didn't play. In fact, we didn't even, I'd like to say we observed or went and watched the game. We really didn't make it to too many games. But anyway, we'd get us a bottle of Smirnoff. This just came to me. I don't know. I get stuck on Mad Dog wine. I drink some really good stuff too, wine as well as whiskey. But we got a hold of. We drink some Smirnoff. We had a guy that was 21 that would buy it for us, and just loved drinking screwdrivers. And so that became something we do during the week, and certainly the weekends. The party was on, and I would lie to my parents. Some of my buddies would lie to their parents. And then we had some rich friends in Whispering Pines that their parents would go out of town a lot. And we'd have a house to ourselves like all weekend. And so that was kind of cool. And that happened a lot. And when we weren't doing that, we were either riding around drinking and getting high, or we were in the woods drinking and getting high. And but we were like always on the move. And obviously, when you're staying up all night or partying all weekend, drinking and just smoking weed won't cut it. So we did get involved in a lot of other drugs. And that would just allow me to roll harder, longer, and faster. And, I was a guy that, nobody ever had to twist my arm to do anything. Like I was, if I brought anything to Alcoholics Anonymous when I got here, I brought an open mind. Probably not in a good way, but I brought an open mind because I was open to anything. Like I didn't care. Let's just do it. Let's see what happens. And that's kind of the way it was. And but I'll tell you, and my parents instilled good values. I mean, tell the truth, be honest, or whatever. And I was able, and good work ethic. I was able to move past all that pretty quick. They instilled all that good stuff in me. But I'll tell you what kind of friend I was. Now I would act like I was your friend, but this is what that really looked like. One night we were leaving the party in Cameron. I was 15 years old, and a buddy of mine, I think he was 17 or 18. He's a little older, and then his girlfriend was 15. Don't even ask me about all that, but that's what it was. And we were too drunk to drive, so he put her to drive, and it was her car. We didn't have any kind of group conscience. I'm like, I'm just along for the ride. And she ran through a stop sign. It was foggy late one night, Saturday night. She ran through a stop sign there at Union Pines and hit an embankment. And, we're just kind of dazed and confused. And her and I get out of the car, and again, I'm a guy that's flying below the radar. And when it hits the fan, like, I'm going to take care of me, and I don't care about anybody else. But a guy came along that we knew and picked us up. Took her home, and then he took me home. And her boyfriend, we just left him there, basically left him for dead. Now, the good news is he wasn't seriously injured and he wasn't dead, thank God, but we didn't know that, as far as I know. But that's the kind of friend I was. Like, when things, like, if I think the police is going to be involved, if I think I'm going to get in trouble with my parents, like, I'm out of here, I'm gone. And I don't even think twice about that kind of stuff. Turns out the next morning, I went home, went to sleep. My parents didn't know anything. They had some kind of meeting. It was a Sunday morning. They went off somewhere. And the next morning, I tried to move my left wrist. And I knew it kind of felt funny Saturday night, but Sunday morning, I was pretty well medicated Saturday night, but Sunday morning it was wearing off, and I could just feel those bones grinding together. And so my sisters took me to the emergency room, and I had a broken wrist. And but that's, nobody else, as far as I know, got hurt. But I just, that I don't even know how to explain that to my parents. Probably lied. I don't even know how that worked out. But don't recall getting in any trouble about that. So I continued to live like that, and this has kind of changed now, it seems. Back in the day, when you turn 16, you're down at the driver's license agency, DMV, getting your license, and that's what happened with me. And I'll tell you, that was a new freedom and a new happiness when I got my driver's license. And in Carthage, now Carthage was a pretty cool town to grow up in. Now, growing up, I didn't think so, because the police harassed me, eventually started harassing me, like I would say harassed me. What they were doing is actually doing their job. But in Carthage, once you turned 16, if you could pull through the beer store, they had a drive-in window, they'd sell you beer, and which was pretty cool. And so that by that time, it wasn't any problem getting beer anyway. And and during this time, I always hung out with an older crowd. And during this time, what happened is the guys I hung around with, if we buy a case of beer and there's 4 of us, that don't mean each one of you gets 6 beers. That ain't the math. We had new math back in the old days. Whoever drinks the fastest gets the most. That's just the way it is. They don't care who paid for it or how that works. And so what I did is I had to learn to drink fast with those guys. That's just, just what we did. And about this time, so I grew up in that store. We work on old cars. My dad was pretty mechanically inclined, and he taught me how to fix things. And so if something's broke, we figured it out, and that's just the way it was. And but by this time, I'm 16, 17 years old. My parents, I don't feel like they're paying me enough money. Certainly not to live the lifestyle that I want to live. And so I start stealing money from them. I start stealing merchandise from them. And I don't know how or why they thought it was a good idea I had the combination to the safe, but I did. And I'm a guy that I guess maybe I was a good thief. I really never stole much from anybody except my parents. That's a lie. I'll get to that other piece in a minute. But I would go into that safe and take a little money at the time. I didn't go in there and clean it out. What ended up happening, in about the same time, I guess, I guess I never stole from somebody without having kind of an inside job, but we knew some people that worked at some convenience stores there in town, and it was nice for a while. We could go in there and get all the beer we wanted, wine, cigarettes, rolling papers, Visine, got to have some of that. And so I stole a lot of money from a couple of local guys that owned those stores. Not money, but I stole a lot of merchandise from those guys. And but what happened was I'm a guy that's out of control, but I'm not getting in any trouble really. I mean, I do, I'm skipping school, minor stuff like that. But what happens? I graduate from high school and I'm riding around town because I couldn't drink at home. Now we had some people that eventually got places of their own, but most of the time I was riding around drinking and driving and doing all that stuff. And I'm riding outside of town and the deputy sheriff pulls me over, and I really didn't think I was that drunk, but apparently that little breathalyzer will tell the truth. He asked me if I'd been drinking, and a few, I don't know, and he wanted me to walk a white line. I said, well, I'm too drunk to walk. That's why I'm driving. And this dude didn't have any sense of humor, and so we went to jail. And it was weird that my brother-in-law and sister came by when I was in the process of getting arrested, and the cop let them drive my car home, and he gave me a free ride to jail. And I was glad because I had some weed in the car that I really didn't want him to find. The cop or my brother-in-law, really, because my brother-in-law would have smoked it. But it was just kind of and I was pretty tore up. I blew I think a 19, and it was kind of all fun and games until I'm in the sheriff's department or the jail, and I look up and I see my dad. And my dad's a man of few words, and the only thing he said is, "This will cost you." And and again, I was 18 at the time, and it's sort of an unspoken rule in our house. Once you turn 18, you kind of can do what you want. Now they want you to check in or come home like eventually or whatever, but I didn't get a lot of pressure, after we turned 18. But by this time, I'm a guy that's drinking. I'm drinking every day. But by this time, I've gotten involved in a lot of other stuff, and what my life looked like is that if I tried to throttle back from the drinking, I'd probably be okay maybe the next day, but usually that second or third day I would be so deathly sick that I realized that quitting drinking altogether was a bad idea because I couldn't function. And even on a good day, I would wake up in the morning and I'd be sick and I'd be shaken and broke. And, I'd be so sick I couldn't brush my teeth. So I just, that hygiene just kind of went away. And, but my drinking shifts. Now, what I would tell you was that it was the police's fault for harassing me. They need to leave me alone. I did have a cop there in town. He would pull up beside us. We'd just be hanging out at the laundromat, drinking and smoking dope or doing whatever we were doing. And he would search me. And I don't know why I didn't have enough sense to hide it a little better. And he took my weed a couple of times. But he told me, he said, the third strike, you're out. But I didn't pay any attention to that because I'm smarter than that. That ain't going to happen to me. Like, I've had friends that's gotten busted and friends that's gotten multiple DUIs, and, that's just not going to happen to me, I didn't think. But what happened, my drinking, I would tell you I could quit anytime I wanted to, but the truth of the matter is I knew in my heart that I probably couldn't. And so I think my drinking kind of shifted, and I enjoyed partying and having a good time, and there was a lot of good times associated with it. But by this time, and this is mostly looking back on it, I think. I don't even know I was aware of it at the time, maybe somewhat. But I started drinking with a purpose. Like, my parents ended up closing that store and filing bankruptcy. They ended up getting their house foreclosed on. So what used to look like a middle-class family looked like a family that went through a lot of financial trouble. And that's bad enough to kind of, have that pill to swallow. But to think that I contributed to a fair amount of that was hard to accept. And so I'm a guy that's drinking to check out. I'm full of a lot of guilt and remorse and shame. Not only by the way I treat my parents, but girlfriends, guy friends. I mean, anybody that crossed my path was going to be sorry they met me. That's the way it was. And so, I drank the next 2 years, with that kind of purpose. Like, I wanted it to be partying and having a good time. But those days were coming to a quick, coming to a screeching halt, really. About this time when Dad closed the store, I got graduated from high school. I did have an older brother that had a little repair business, appliance repair business. I started trying to do that for a couple of years. He financed it. It was high finance. I think he signed a note or co-signed or something for me to borrow $2,400. And after about 6 months, when I had never made a payment or didn't make many of them, that kind of fell apart. And I tell you what, my life looked like. I was living at home with my parents. I wasn't paying any rent. Never any extra money to pay any rent. Always a little extra money to drink, it seems. And I knew this was kind of the end of that little business, if that's even what you wanted to call it. But my mom, I had a service call in Robbins. We lived in Carthage. Mom said, "Are you going to go run that service call?" I said, "Mom, I don't have enough gas to get there." And that's just kind of where I had gotten financially. I mean, I was just in a lot of trouble, and not just financially, but I was broken in every way. And about this time, I was able to get a deal worked out with a guy where I could sell a little weed, and so I started selling weed. And I screwed up one morning. Like I said, I was living at home with my parents, and I left one morning, and I got uptown, and I realized I'd left an ounce of weed in my pillowcase. And Mom never went upstairs because my other two brothers and me, we lived upstairs in our parents' house, and like if you go up there, you needed a hazmat suit. Like it was bad. You didn't want to go up there alone. But anyhow, this particular morning, she seemed to think it was a good idea to go make up my bed, and she took my weed. And when I got back home, it was gone. And so her and I had to have an intervention with my mom about my weed. And I told her, I said, "Look, I got it on credit from this guy. If you give it back to me, I can take it back to him. And it'll all be good." And she actually gave it back to me, which was really a shocker because I didn't know who she was. But all of a sudden, I thought I had the coolest mom on the planet. She didn't get any more after that, though. I can tell you that. It's a bad idea. But here's what she told me, which is probably the best piece of advice. My dad would always say, "God has blessed you with a good brain. Why are you trying to ruin it?" And I think that was when he caught me with a bunch of Quaaludes. And I'm like, and I'm just thinking to myself, you don't understand. At this point, I was still loving to get high or whatever. But my mom told me, she said, because I was telling her all this, whatever going on, and she said, "Have you tried talking to the Lord about your problems?" And my mom, a good Christian woman, not a religious woman. We went to church growing up, but I never was interested in that. And she just kind of said it in a matter-of-fact way. I didn't feel any judgment or condemnation or any of that stuff, but she just threw that idea out there. And I'm thinking that idea don't make sense to me, but apparently it did to her. But what happened was I ended up getting a second DUI. I was sitting uptown one night in Carthage. I got a second DUI, and I got a felony charge of selling weed because I didn't turn that weed back in. I ended up cutting it up in quarters like I normally did. And I was scared to death. Like that first DUI, I just kind of blew it off. But this second one, I knew my license was gone for 4 years. A felony charge, I mean, you don't ever know what that's going to look like. And I'll tell you what happened. I was a guy that could not get to sleep at night unless I was drinking or getting high or doing something. Just to lay down and go to sleep was not even an option. But I was laying in bed one night and I asked God, I said, God, help me straighten up. And I really wasn't much of a praying guy. And I certainly didn't say a sincere prayer. Well, I think God's the judge of that. My job to pray. It's His job to figure out if I mean it or not, I reckon. But what happened was, y'all paying attention, aren't you? That prayer started being answered. And I tell you, that's a good piece of advice tonight. I think my job to tell my story, not give any advice, but I'm glad my mom told me to pray, and it made sense. But I think if we do pray, we probably should pay attention, because that answer started coming through an attorney that was a non-alcoholic that I had to go see, because that seemed like a good idea. And I guess he told me about a substance abuse counselor that was a non-alcoholic, and I went and saw that person. And I'm telling you, my motive was not to get sober and change my life and turn it all around. My motive was, I ain't got much going on my resume, and when I go in front of that judge, I need something on my resume that looks like I might be wanting to change, I guess. So I went to that counselor, and he told me about Alcoholics Anonymous. And before I forget, I'll just put in a plug for CPCPI work. You hear that? Some of us, I barely could spell it, but it's cooperation with professional community and public information. Gary and Brenda head up our committee at the group level with that stuff. And other than looking into another alcoholic's beady eyes and reading the book and trying to help them through the steps, I don't know if we got any more important work to do than tell professionals and folks in our lives and in our community that Alcoholics Anonymous is alive and well. And I say that to say this, because somewhere prior to 1984, somebody had told that lawyer about this counselor, and the counselor somebody had told him about Alcoholics Anonymous. And he suggested I go to a meeting. I did over here at the Episcopal Church on a Monday night, my very first meeting. Now, that didn't slow me down much. I don't even think it broke my rhythm. But I went back and saw that counselor, and he told me about a treatment center down in Rockingham, Samaritan Colony. He's like, you might want to go check into that place. And I'm like, man, he sure enough lost his mind now. He done tried to sentence me to AA, and I dodged that one, sort of. But what he told me was that it's a place that could help me now. And the help I was thinking was, that's a place I can go and spend some time. And when I get out and have to go get tried for these charges, it'll look good in front of the judge. And this was on a Friday. And he told me, he said, now you have to go 48 hours without drinking or anything before checking in down there. And that place was an 8-week program back then. And he's wanting me to start 2 days early. I thought, this dude has lost his mind. But I didn't even require detox back then, which was a bad idea, because I did end up going down there. I drank as much as I could up late Sunday night before I went and checked in Monday morning. Don't tell Harold that. He probably still don't know. But I agreed to do that. And, that was just another form of that prayer being answered. And sometimes we hear about miracles, and that sounds kind of weird or whatever, but I think miracles simply for me is just something that happens that really ain't logical. Like, it can't really be explained. Like, I'm guessing there's probably a bunch of alcoholics in this room. And, well, thinking about Netters, there's some potential alcoholics in this room too. And most of us are sober. Hopefully all of us are sober. But that's a bit of a stretch. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. I ain't going out on that limb. And that just ain't logical, you know? That just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's where I got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got introduced to members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got introduced to the program that's laid out in the book. And what I did was, I knew, you know, after being sober for a few weeks, you know, I knew I was powerless. I knew. So when they talked about I've got the mind of a chronic alcoholic, that sounds a little rough. Like chronic alcoholic, you ought to have to at least be 30 years old to be diagnosed with chronic alcoholism. But chronic is just something I keep doing over and over again, regardless of the consequences. And so that made sense. But I knew I was powerless, and I knew that I had the mind of an alcoholic. That once you know, that I'm just obsessed with drinking. I'm obsessed with getting high. I'm obsessed with running wild. And I was a guy that's driven by a lot of selfishness and dishonesty. But I knew I had a mind that all I thought about was drinking if I wasn't drinking. The other thing they said, some information, it's in the book, that once I start drinking, it sets off that phenomenal craving. I can't quit. That makes no sense to me. So I've got a mind that I can't, left to my own devices, I can't stay away from the first drink, period, because I have no power. And once I start drinking, because it's inevitable, it's going to happen. If I don't have any power in my life, I can't quit. And so that all sounded kind of weird to me, and it just didn't make sense. But what they told me and what the book said is, what that really looks like is a spiritual illness. That I'm so full of resentment and hate and anger and self-pity by the way I've treated people and the way I've lived, that I meet up with a spiritual illness. And what they told me, what the book says, is I had to get well spiritually first, and then I could straighten out mentally and physically. Now, what I thought was, once I quit drinking, I'm going to physically start feeling better and I should be good. But what they told me was, it don't matter how good I feel or how long I've been sober those first few weeks or months, if I don't connect with some kind of higher power or power greater than myself, I'm dead meat. Like I don't have a chance. And so what I did was I got beyond steps 1, 2, and 3, trying to make sense of it. I mean, I was driven. The book describes my hopelessness to a T. It was terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. Because here I am, a 20-year-old guy. I'm eat up with alcoholism, and my solution is a spiritual solution. Like, I am really dead in the water, because not only did I believe I could connect with any power, I didn't believe I could connect with that power, nor was I even sure I wanted to. But when you're a few weeks from a drink, I was able to look at my life, and I guess going back doing some critical thinking. I don't even know if that was a thing back in 1984, but I did an assessment of my life, and I thought, if I can take some steps and do what these people said they did, and they're free, maybe it can happen for me. So that's what I did. I ended up getting out of there and go. But here's what my life looked like. I would go to some meetings. I was staying sober, but I really didn't connect to a home group. You know, I was connected somewhat to people in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I couldn't tell you really if I had a sponsor. I did not hit the ground running as really being involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I saw it as a place I go, it's meetings, and I'm good. So what happened? I ended up, I moved in with my oldest brother, because I'd kind of worked with him some, the one that signed that note. He still had tabs on me a little bit. But I moved in with him. Bad idea, really, for them, mostly. Worked out good for me, but I should have went to a halfway house. That would have made more sense. But I moved in with him. He had two small daughters, like, I don't know, 6 and 8 years old. And, you know, I ended up, you know, going to jail for 7 days, but I got tried and lost my license and all that stuff. But I was living with him, working with him. I really didn't need license. He was driving. We worked together on the road doing stuff. And I'll tell you how intense that guy living at his house, bless his daughter's heart. We came home one day and they had all my stuff packed up on the front porch. Now, it's not like they had a big front porch. It held 2 grocery bags. That's about all I had. But I had to talk to them and talk to that 6 and 8 year old girl to let me stay a little while longer until I could do a little better. And after I was sober a year, I was able to get my own place. My brother ended up moving to Myrtle Beach. I took odd jobs. I did what I could to make ends meet. And, you know, beyond 1 year, I had my own place. I was pretty much self-supporting. And, you know, I just, you know, I got involved after a couple of years. I got my license back. I got a job and a real job. And I was more interested in making money and chasing girls and doing some crazy stuff than I was Alcoholics Anonymous. And that carried me through for a little while. And this is just my story. I ain't proud of it, but that was my experience. And hopefully maybe somebody can learn from it. But after about 5 years, I was going to church, had this girlfriend. It fell apart. And I was kind of devastated, and I didn't really have any spirituality. Going to church is kind of like going to AA meetings. That will not produce spirituality. It just won't do it, I don't believe, at least not for me. But I talked to a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He says you really need to get involved. He said you should do something you probably hadn't done since you've been sober, and that's join Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm like, dude, I go to meetings. I've been sober. But I wasn't a member of Alcoholics Anonymous to speak of. Anyhow, I was able to do that and got some semblance of peace in my mind and purpose. And what happened was I just rolled on the next few years, and I had one of my older brothers actually wanted to introduce me to smoking weed. He'd gotten sober at this point, and he said, Tom Iverster's doing a big book workshop. You know, we should go. And I knew Tom. Now, Tom had spoke down at that treatment center. He was 27 years sober. There's Daniels here. That's kind of interesting, but he was sober. He was 27 years. I'm like, my God, who stays sober 27 years? That's insane. But anyhow, my brother Bill said Tom's doing this workshop, we should go, and we did. And I don't know if Tom was a slow reader or we slow learners, but after about 18 months, we finished up some piece of the book. I don't know how much. We may have gotten through the first 164 pages. Who knows? But anyway, that's when he talked about, and he had a good home group. A lot of us had good home groups. We weren't mad at anybody. We didn't have resentment or coffee pot, but we wanted to start a group that was focused on service. And so we threw some things, ideas up on a whiteboard in Doug Smith's back at his golf shop, and we started this group in June of 1997. And, you know, I just appreciate being a part of a good home group that not only is our name primary purpose group, Matthew did a good job explaining that last Thursday. That's our job description. Like, we take that fifth tradition extremely serious. And I'm not a guy, so I don't know. I just to hit a little bit on the home group, I'm not a guy that likes to sit in a bunch of committee meetings and whatever. But the reason I go to our committee meetings that we have every night of the week, it seems, is we're either going to talk about what we've done the last 30 days to carry the message to alcoholics, or provide good meetings here outside of tonight, provide good meetings here and what we're doing in the community. We're either going to talk about what we did the last 30 days or our vision of what the next 30 days look like. I'll buy into that kind of action, but I don't want to just sit around and look at our belly button and try to figure out what's wrong with us or what's wrong with me. You know, y'all said don't rush into a relationship. I didn't after those first couple of failed relationships. I don't know, you kind of have to define a relationship. But anyway, I didn't get married until 1999. Jeanette came along and we started dating and got married, and I appreciate that piece of my life for sure. And you know what I learned by being involved in the home group and being well sponsored and is that, you know, my job is to look for opportunities to serve, and there's a lot. Like, I'm not all day every day thinking who can I help. I'm not quite that codependent, but I am trying to look for opportunities to help people, because there's a lot of opportunity to help people. And I know this group and other groups in our community, a lot of good groups. We've done a lot of work in Moore County, but we've not even scratched the surface. Like, there's so much work to be done to try to help people. And I tell you what, so I appreciate being well sponsored. I'm current with my sponsor. I try to sponsor some new guys. And one of the things when it comes to sponsorship is, if I meet a new guy, now not everybody believes this, but this is the way it was shown to me. If I meet a new guy, eventually, if he keeps coming back for a few times, I'm going to get his phone number, and I'm going to talk to him about sponsorship. And I'm going to give him my phone number. But I think the important thing is I get his phone number, because it's a lot easier for me to reach out to a new guy than it is for them to reach out to us sometimes. And so anyway, I try to do that. A couple things, like I was able to make amends to my parents. My dad was able to see me sober 18 years before he passed away in 2003. I'm grateful for that. When he drew his last breath, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was nothing else I needed to say, nothing else I needed to do. Like, that relationship had been amended. It had been repaired. Still working on Mom. She turned 92 a couple of weeks ago. She's a little out of control. I'm kidding. She's good. She just likes to talk a lot. But we try to get up there 2 or 3 times a week, take her to dinner. She's gracious like that. She'll go. She'll let us pay. She broke out a 20 one time a few weeks ago. We'd gone to dinner. She broke out a 20. I like to have a heart attack. I didn't even know what she was doing. I'm like, where'd you get that money? Anyway, I won't say that. But I'm grateful that I've been able to be a good, I hope a good son to my parents, a good brother, a good uncle, hopefully a good husband. You'll have to check that with Jeanette. I say that one kind of loosely. But I'll just close with this. I'll tell you, one of the most important things I appreciate is good leadership and good guidance in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the way it was explained to me is, if I want to know what's important in my life, there's 2 places I can look. I can look in my checkbook to see where my money's going, and I can look at my calendar to see where my time is going. Am I buying a lot of stuff and extending myself and overdoing it in that area, or am I giving away a certain amount of money? And people taught me that. Like, that makes no sense when you're barely getting by like I was. But they taught me how to give. And if I can't write a check or can't give, the more important thing to give, probably more important, I think, beyond me giving some money, is giving my time and trying to help somebody else. And that's what I try to do. You know, if I get a new guy, what I do is I sit down and we go through the book. And we're going to read, and we're going to take steps, and we're going to pray. And I'm just grateful that because of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that 12 step, it comes alive in my life every day. I get up in the morning and I try to ask for help, and I try to pray for some other people. And as a result of taking those simple steps, that power has showed up in my life, and I'm a guy that's been free ever since. And here's what I like about that. That power is open to anyone. Like, none of us are so special that God looks at us and says, okay, you're going to be sober, but you're not. And it's been my experience from my own life and trying to help some other people that if I show up and take some simple steps and take those simple actions and be willing to help other people, that I can have purpose and I can be free and I can be sober. And it's way beyond. If being sober would have just been not going back to jail for 40 years, I'd have been okay with that. But I sold myself short because it's way more than that. It's about the relationships and the friendships. So, Lynn, thank you. Appreciate y'all being here.